Welcome to the Debrief, where we talk with the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the headlines they're covering this week and where the story's going next. I'm Sarah Westwood, and I'm here today with senior political correspondent David Drucker. And David, obviously, Ukraine being invaded by Russia, really big in the news right now. Biden's handling this has been a subject of criticism. Do you think that potentially he's going to suffer the same political fate with this as he did with Afghanistan, bungling something that experts predicted for months?
I don't think so. I see this as separate from Afghanistan, other than I think that there's a case to be made that Vladimir Putin thought Biden was a pushover, therefore invaded Ukraine because of his handling of Afghanistan, how he mishandled it, how chaotic it was, and how it made it appear as though the U.S. was shrinking from the world stage, and that tyrants like Putin or the authoritarian regime in China had more of a sort of, there was more of a carte blanche scenario for them to do the things they wanted to do vis-a-vis Ukraine, for China vis-a-vis Taiwan. Biden, I think, has actually had a pretty stiff spine when it has come to Russia and Ukraine. He's said all of the right things. He's done many of the right things in terms of ratcheting up sanctions as Russia signaled it was going to invade, leaving some sanctions open for some stiff punishments if they did invade, which they have. His rhetoric has been very unequivocal, which is very important coming from an American president, for the rhetoric to be unequivocal. Actions matter, but so does rhetoric. The Biden administration has increased U.S. assistance to Ukraine. We've deployed troops to these frontline NATO countries, the Baltics, that feel threatened by Russia, and rightly so, Poland. So I think Joe Biden is handling this crisis much better by far than he handled Afghanistan. Of course, the criticism, and this is very fair criticism, is that Putin felt emboldened because of how he decided to handle Afghanistan, and those two things are tied together. So the question now is, are the American people going to look at his handling of this crisis and say to themselves, hey, much better, or are they going to say, it's your fault anyway, this wouldn't have happened had you done the first thing correctly? And I think we're going to find a mixed bag there. The American people don't want to send U.S. troops to fight for Ukraine. It was never on the table. Excuse me, neither a Republican nor Democratic president would do that. We are bound by Article 5 in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization to defend NATO members. Any president would do that, and President Biden has made clear we will do that. And for him, this is a chance to try and rewrite some of his foreign policy missteps. There's always another crisis. And then if he can manage to do that, if he can at least keep the American people reasonably satisfied with his handling of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and it's still hard to tell where this thing is going because it's going to be so devastating, and it's going to embolden other authoritarian regimes to think they can do similar things. Then there's the domestic fallout, because ratcheting up sanctions, just the invasion alone, is going to have repercussions for the U.S. economy, and of course that can get voters very skittish.
So that leads me to my next question. What could complicate the political picture for Biden here at home would be if he does go forward, as you mentioned, with the most serious of the sanctions that he's threatened, there could be some economic pain, rising fuel costs, and even beyond that. Do you think that politically that could make people dissatisfied with his handling of it, even if he's doing, as you say, everything sort of by the book?
I think it could definitely make Americans just dissatisfied with him generally, although they already are. I mean, if you look at a lot of the polling, his numbers with Democrats remain pretty solid, but independents have soured on him. Republicans never gave him a chance. That's just the way things are these days, not a criticism. And so I think that, given that Biden is already facing domestic crises when it comes to inflation, when it comes to a porous southern border, enabled in part by his policies coming in after the Trump administration, and the lingering coronavirus pandemic. If energy prices increase even more, and in the initial hours of the invasion, oil was over $100 a barrel, if this causes a disruption in supply chains, if this causes heartburn in the stock market, all of these things can make Americans very nervous about their own personal economic situation, nervous about the country's economic situation, and that's just not going to help anybody. Now, that's not going to help any politician when it comes to voters, because they usually are going to look at the top, who's in charge. Well, Biden's in charge, must be his fault, could have done something about this. Now, I will say President Biden has tried to brace Americans for the economic impact and potential hardship of, in his words, standing up for democracy, making it clear to Russia that there is going to be punishment and pain when it comes to their invasion of Ukraine and other measures they may take. And that is how you definitely try and quell any voter backlash before it happens, by saying, look, we know it's going to be tough, we acknowledge that, we feel for you, but we're all in this together, and it's important for the country and for your children's future that we stand up to a tyrant. So there are ways that President Biden can navigate this. I think the question is going to remain, how much attention is he going to give this? How often is he going to talk about this? How much leadership is he going to provide, not just behind the scenes and talking to our NATO allies, but out front talking to Americans about what is happening, why it's happening, and then doing everything possible to mitigate the economic impact of the invasion and the U.S. response to it. One area of vulnerability for the president is that Democrats are very concerned about climate change, and the president has taken steps to reduce U.S. reliance and use of fossil fuel. He has reduced the ability of the United States to drill its own oil, mine its own energy in response to concerns about climate change. Well, that increases U.S. demand for overseas energy. These are the sorts of things he's going to have to navigate.
Well, David, thank you so much for being here today. And you can get more reporting from David and the rest of the political team at WashingtonExaminer.com.